Hi, Year 4. Today's writing lesson is following on from Monday, where you should have come up with 3 alternative problems and solutions to a chosen fairy tale. Let's have a look at what we're doing today. So today we are going to be learning how to use a sensational or sizzling start and draft our narrative. What I'm looking for is you can choose a way of beginning your narrative, and you can begin drafting your narrative starting with your orientation, that's meant to say, and include adequate description of your character and setting. So why should we start sensationally? The first few sentences of a narrative text are really important. I don't know about you, but when I pick up a book, I am either drawn in from the start or I'm not interested. And it depends on how the book starts. So your job as an author to make it exciting. And one of the ways we can do this is to use a sensational story starter, which leaves the reader wanting more. This is sometimes referred to as a hook. Just like a fish, you want people to be hooked on your story so they can't escape. So here are some examples of ways you might start your narrative. You can start with action. Start your narrative with intense, captivating action. For example, the flying saucer spun recklessly out of control, twisting frantically across the sky in all directions. There was no stopping the doomed machine now. A terrible disaster seemed inevitable. By reading that, you're pretty excited. They've used heaps of adjectives and adverbs to describe the action that is happening. So you can start your story in that way, with an action of what's happening right in the middle of it. You can start with a description of your setting. For example, on top of a hill, Longreach Castle stood proud and silent. The wooden drawbridge was raised, the windows blackened, the turrets dotted with soldiers in a state of constant alert. Passers-by should move along, for they would not be welcome here. By reading that, we can really visualize what the setting is. Once again, it's used lots of adjectives. And it's used a bit of metaphorical language here, or figurative language here, where it says it stood proud and silent. So that's another way you can start your story, with setting. Or you can start with the description of a character. For example, Bruce the Burly vigorously punched the sky with his thick, muscular arms. It was a sign of celebration of victory. He clenched his rusted sword tightly in his right hand and bared his teeth to his fallen enemies. Once again, lots of adjectives. They're describing what the character is doing, and we know that by reading that, he is obviously a hero of some sort. We know that he's just beaten his enemies, and that's the way the story is going to start. You might start with dialogue, which is a conversation. Now, I find that some writers, particularly young writers, get into a trap of using dialogue through their whole story without a good balance of narrative as well. So be careful with this intro. Make sure that you've got a good balance of dialogue and then you writing what is happening through narrative. For example, we have to get out of here now, Josh called frantic. I hear you, Jenna cried, picking up speed. Remember the rules, we must never ever be seen. So that's one way. It's also describing the action there, but we already know the characters in that. We don't know the setting quite yet from that intro, but by using dialogue, you can kind of grab both things. And this is an interesting way to start, using a rhetorical question. For example, have you ever felt like your head was spinning out of control? Does it seem to keep turning faster and faster, relentlessly sending you off your balance? So by using a rhetorical question, it is sort of setting the scene for what the story is about to be about. Maybe something really goes wrong, something troublesome that makes you feel like you're out of control. Another way to start your story is through a statement, a thought-provoking statement. For example, I've always wondered why witches have such a terrible reputation. It seems awfully unfair to label them as all devious, ugly creatures. Most of the witches I've met have been quite the contrary, which is the opposite. So that's a thought-provoking statement that gets the reader to go, okay, this book's going to be a bit different. It's not going to be about evil witches, but maybe about nice ones. Or another good way to start, which is a nice easy one, is using onomatopoeia. Remember, onomatopoeia are the words that are describing a sound. Crash, boom, bang, etc. Ring, ring, crash. What was that? Chrissy cried, waking suddenly from a deep sleep. She sat upright in her bed, clutched tightly to her teddy and stared anxiously around the bedroom. So by that, we know the character, we know where she is, but it's used onomatopoeia to get us reading. So our orientation is the introduction in the narrative. It introduces the characters, setting, and a plot. Your orientation shouldn't be written in a way that isn't too direct. E.g., once upon a time there was a girl in a house and she had an evil stepmother. That's pretty boring and not very exciting. It's very literal. We want to make our writing interesting by using descriptive language that makes the reader visualize. The way you write needs to be to indirectly describe the characters and setting, e.g., Kelsey never really did get along with her stepmother. She was constantly insisting that she clean the house spick and span. So here, I've really said a very similar thing here. But rather than once upon a time a girl in a house, she had an evil stepmother, I've described who she is. I've said that she doesn't get along with her stepmother because she was told to clean all the time. So you can make it a bit more exciting by thinking about using one of those story starters. So let's have a look at my example now. So I have used my brainstorm from Monday and I've built on that to write my introduction. Now I haven't got a title for my narrative yet. I like to do that last once I've sort of developed the story a bit more to give it a catchy title. Okay, I have started with a bit of a description of setting. It was a bright Sunday afternoon, and the sound of clattering and banging could be heard throughout the neighbourhood of Fairytale Town. You can see that I've underlined in red the setting that is described here. We straight away know it was a bright Sunday afternoon, and where in Fairytale Town. And I feel like that description makes the reader visualize. You would think that you just have a house and it's nice and sunny, but there's banging and clattering coming from the house. I go on. Little Red was busily mixing, whisking, and pouring amongst the mess of her kitchen. So there I haven't just said Little Red was cooking. I've tried to describe what was happening. And here we've introduced the character Little Red. She was doing her weekly cook-up for her grandfather, and today it was raspberry and white chocolate muffins. So there, I haven't just said she was baking raspberry and white chocolate muffins. I've tried to describe it and give her reason why she's doing it. It's her weekly cook-up. And here I've introduced the next character, her grandfather. Her grandfather lived alone just beyond Rue de Ville, where some of the cruelest villains lived. So there I've described where they are and what that gives a bit of a clue as to what might happen. I've got the cruelest villains. I've used an adjective and I've also introduced another setting, the Rue de Ville. So each week Red would visit him and bring afternoon tea. Red was a cheerful 12-year-old and it never did bother her having to traverse past the crooked, spooky houses, knowing eyes were watching her. Now I've used this word traverse. I haven't just said she walked. I've tried to use a synonym, an exciting word, to replace just walked. I've described the house as crooked, spooky houses, and knowing eyes are watching her. That makes the reader visualize all the eyes peering out the windows as Red walked past. And I've said that it never does bother her. Here I'm starting to describe Red's personality without being like Red wasn't scared. I've tried to describe it in an indirect way. She was brought up to always look at the bright side of life and see the good in everyone. And that there is a little bit of a hint as to what may happen down the end of the story, as to why she might show forgiveness, that she was brought up to always look at the bright side of life. So here is my orientation. I've introduced my settings, I've introduced my characters, and I've given a sneak peek at the plot. I haven't started the problem straight away. So that's what you guys are going to do today. You're going to start with your orientation. Remember, this is at the beginning of the story in which the setting, the characters, and the plot are introduced. Try and use one of the ways of starting your narrative on the previous slides and just focus on your orientation today. Now, as you can see by mine, it's not a short orientation. It's not just one or two sentences, it's a paragraph, nearly more. This is the start of your story, and you want to do a really good job of it. And this didn't take me, it wasn't, this took me a bit of thought, I had to put in a bit of thinking behind this because this really sets the scene for your whole story. But I feel like the problem, whatever the problem and the solution is that you guys brainstormed last week, that is really going to be important in um, indicating where your orientation will start from. If you've got a good problem, your orientation hopefully will come a bit easier. So that's your task today. You're also going to upload a photo into OneNote, please. So good luck. Hopefully you guys are feeling inspired by some of the sizzling starts. Please choose one of those ways. They're all there to help you, so flip between the slides if you need to remember what they are.